I'm Kajal. I'm one of the PGY4 residents in my first year of research in the global surgery track. I'm excited to be meeting with you all and hearing a little bit more about your questions and what you want to know about our program. The focus for today is on our research and professional development initiatives. And so giving you guys a little bit more of a spotlight on those programs and kind of really facilitating a conversation. We want to make this as interactive as possible. So we'll start out with quick introductions with faculty as well as the residents we have almost all of our research residents on this call. And then just a few quick slides to go through our program structure. And then we'll go over to Q&A and hopefully get to talk with you guys a little bit more. So just to start off, Dr. Wright was unable to make it, but has been moderating a few of these sessions. So some of you might have seen him previously. He does a lot of the research and work in surgical skills education. And Dr. Horvath is our program director and also associate chair for education. Both of them might pop in at the end. So if the other faculty have additional comments, you should definitely add in since I'm filling in for them. And Dr. Flum is our associate chair for research, and he runs the SORCE lab and has a T32. Dr. O'Keefe is the director of resident research and also has a T32 over at Harborview. And Dr. Stewart, who is my mentor, is the director of our global surgery research. If you each want to say hi as your slides come up, that would be excellent. And then briefly, if I can have each of the residents just give a couple lines about who you are and what research you're doing and why you chose that. That would be awesome. We'll start with Kat.
I don't think she's here yet.
Fair enough.
She just logged on.
Oh, nice. Hey, Kat, are you there?
Yes. Sorry.
Do you want to give, yeah, you're totally fine. Sorry to put you on the spot right away. If you want to just say hi, tell us who you are, what research you're doing, what lab, and why you chose that.
Yeah, hi. So I'm Catherine Beni. I'm, well, now PGY4 resident. I started the T32 fellowship with Dr. O'Keefe after my R2 year, and I'm currently working on a research project involving precision resuscitation for trauma patients. So the basic goal is to try to understand current IV fluid administration practices after hemostasis is achieved in these trauma patients, and to see if we can improve outcomes by improving our practices. And how I picked it is I've always been plagued by IV fluids since I was an intern, and I knew that I wanted to work on it. And basically I brought the project to Dr. O'Keefe, who was interested, and together we formulated a project, and I've been working on it since.
Awesome, thank you. And then just going across the pictures, Droullard.
Hey everybody, I'm David Droullard. I'm in my second year of research, currently at PGY5. I'm working with Dr. Flum on his T32 fellowship in the Surgical Outcomes Research Center. I'm interested in surgical outcomes broadly, both clinical outcomes and patient-reported outcomes, and I'm interested in ways to incorporate the patient voice in research. So to that end, I'm doing some projects looking at patient-reported outcomes in diverticulitis, as well as some survey data looking at quality of life for people who deal with that disease. And then on the clinical end, I'm looking at the outcomes, pregnancy outcomes specifically after appendicitis during pregnancy, and looking at whether non-operative management is being used for those patients.
Excellent, thank you, Chris.
Hi, my name's Chris. I'm currently a PGY3 in my first year research. I'm actually not in Seattle for my research years. I'm at the University of Wisconsin on a T32 within their division of transplant. And the way in which that came about is basically I'm interested in transplant immunology, specifically tolerance induction, which is what we're working on here. And although there are an abundance of research opportunities at UW and within the transplant division as well, but there's no lab currently there, and so I ended up looking elsewhere and ended up here. But I should say that I stay connected with the division, doing some outcomes research with them as well. So kind of straddled between the two UWs right now, but I'll be returning after these 2 years to finish out residency.
Awesome, thank you. Lois, are you on?
I am. Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Hey guys, I'm Alex. I'm a second-year research resident working with Dr. Flum and with David over at the Surgical Outcomes Research Center, working on several different projects focused on biliary disease, foregut surgery, and I think costs and value in healthcare. These were always interests of mine beforehand. I have a clinical interest in foregut surgery and plan on going into MIS, and finishing up a couple different projects looking at the decision to perform cholecystectomy after cholecystostomy, and then also some survey research looking at patient preferences in the management of gallbladder disease.
Awesome, thank you. And as I mentioned before, I'm Kajal. I am currently working with Dr. Stewart as an NIH Fogarty Fellow. My clinical interests are in burns and injury prevention. And so I'm currently doing a virtual fellowship since travel is not allowed with the team in Nepal at the burn center there. So it's been kind of a little bit different than initially imagined, but still has been a year so far of a lot of different opportunities, doing some secondary data analyses, as well as continuing to work with the team in Nepal and moving forward with our research projects together. So it's been really interesting in that way. And then Jamie.
Sorry, I was muted. I'm Jamie. I'm one of the PGY5 research residents in my second year. I'm primarily working with Dr. Nicole Gibran on Dr. O'Keefe's T32 and planning on doing a trauma and burns fellowship. My research is looking at the genetics of fibroproliferative scar formation, specifically in the burn population. I'm also doing several clinical projects relating related to burn outcomes with our burn model systems database that we have here. And I think I'm one of the few residents actively in a lab pipetting, which is a little bit of a different experience, but it's fun. Yeah.
Sorry about that. Is Josh here, Joanna?
No, he's on call.
Okay, excellent. We'll move to Irene then.
Hey everyone, my name is Irene Zhang. I'm one of the first year research residents in the PGY4. I am also working with Dr. Flum and colleagues over at the Surgical Outcomes Research Center, affectionately known as SORCE. And I am very interested in public policy and the impact of policy interventions on clinician behavior. And we're just starting some projects primarily in the space of opioid prescribing after surgery.
Awesome, thank you. So we'll move briefly to the slides portion. And while we're talking, everybody feel free to type in questions as they come up, and we'll address them as we get to the Q&A portion. So just to cover how our NRMP tracks work, we have options of either being research track, which is a 7-year position, which is all of us residents who are on the call currently are on this track. And then there's also a 5-year clinical track for those who are not as interested in research or aren't planning to make it a part of their career. And what is, I think, relatively unique about our program is that you can choose. We have 2 separate codes, so you can rank us for both options, or you can say, I definitely want to be a research scientist and would like to do a 7-year position and rank us just for that position. Or you can rank us just for the clinical track if you are not interested in research. So if you do have a preference, as interview season comes around, and as you interview here and start making a rank list, you should definitely email us, email Dr. Horvath, email Joanna, to let us know if you have a preference so we can take that into account. Briefly, the clinical track is the 5-year program. There's definitely a diverse group of people who are in this track. There are some folks who've already, who are here as a second career, have previously done research and have a PhD. There are others who are more interested in community general surgery and planning on doing clinical training and heading to that direction. And there's also an option with the global surgery track to go through 5 years and then do 2 years of research and clinical work afterwards. It's definitely a very robust training program, during which time clinical research is still supported, and you'll hear a little bit more about our research support that we have, even outside of just the research track itself. And definitely whoever wants to matches at top fellowships. I think we've matched 3 thoracic surgeons in this upcoming year's graduating class, so certainly not something to worry about. And then the research track, as we've spoken about, is the 7-year program. It's typically after the R3 year, although sometimes we'll have a resident go out after the R2 year. As you can see, there's a wide breadth of topics, so not limited to basic sciences, although those are certainly options if that's what your interest is. And kind of really what's unique about UW is that it's home to a very large research institution where there's a lot of room for networking and connections with folks in any area of interest. You'll hear in a little bit about the multiple NIH T32 grants as we turn it over to Dr. Flum and Dr. O'Keefe. And we also do, for residents who are not on a T32 or not on funding through a mentor, do have resident support for salary, as well as support for obtaining higher education degrees. And then I'll actually just hand it over to either Dr. O'Keefe or Dr. Flum, whoever wants to get started, and then talk a little bit more about the opportunities available.
Sure, I'll start. Thanks, Kajal, for that introduction and taking it from Dr. Wright. I'm sure he appreciates you pinch hitting there. So my name's Dave Flum. I've been at UW for about almost 20 years now, and I really enjoy helping people develop their love of research and help support them as faculty, as fellows, as residents, and students. Grant O'Keefe and I work very closely together to help provide resident training opportunities in research along the path. We never used to have a 7-year program. I saw one of the questions coming through about if somebody applies to the 5-year track and that accommodate research. This tracking is relatively recent and intended to make sure that the opportunities for research training that you desire are available for you. So building in some programming. That doesn't necessarily mean that that isn't flexible and adaptable, because it has periodically, it's a relatively recent experiment to go to 7 years. So we think that there is probably some flexibility based on people's interests, but the tracking is intended to make sure that we capture upfront folks can support their interests for folks who are interested in going into research. As Barclay can highlight when he talks a little bit about global surgery, part of the training in that space is to also build in training after residency, research training in global global health research after the clinical training. But the 7-year track is intended to make sure that we have the resources available for you when you want to get into research at UW. So let me just tell you a little bit about that. We've conceived of research development much in the way we've conceived of all other aspects of your professional development. We think there's a set of tools that you're going to need. We want you to develop them and with graduated responsibility. And so by the time you leave the training, the research or the clinical training, you have the tools to accomplish what you want to accomplish. A lot of that's focused on getting structured research training. And there are a lot of NIH-sponsored T32 training grants. These are 2-year grants that allow us to offer you salary and benefits and some resources to do research in the labs that are designated by the NIH. There are a lot of those at UW outside of the department and 2 within the department that Grant O'Keefe's going to be talking about his in a moment, and I'll be talking about mine at another time. But you'll see there's a lot of different topics that are covered in other departments with T32 training grants. And we like to think that we can connect you with the training that you need or are interested in or out of the department. Some of those are more recently, some more recent offerings. And remember, the T32s that are outside of the department, they may be a little bit more competitive, more difficult for surgical trainees to get into because they're developed for those departments, but they are available and we can help create the links and opportunities for you. You'll see the list includes the Injury Prevention Center, Cancer Epidemiology, Palliative Care, Vascular Science, HPB, and Bioengineering, and we'll talk about, we've already heard a little bit about the Fogarty. We also have training opportunities for research in non-NIH training programs. These include something in pediatric surgery over children's, the congenital heart surgery program, an ECMO fellowship, a breast cancer research fellowship, and we're super excited about a new division within the Department of Surgery for simulation, innovation, and education, which has a set of training programs as well. So lots of opportunities. The theme is the same: mentored research with graduated skill development, very much didactic and then applied versions of it, with a portfolio of projects that you've completed by the time you're done with your 2 years that you can both explains to others the skills you've developed, but also gives you the skills in communicating science and how to develop a research career after your training. And that's distinctly the goal of the training program. I'll just highlight a little bit about the T32 that our shop runs. This is the 3rd cycle of funding from the NIDDK, the Digestive Disease Institute. This is a 2-year training program that focuses on outcomes research for general surgeons, with a focus, because it's the NIDDK, on digestive disease, which is pretty much everything that general surgeons do. Folks who do this training program get a lot of training in how to use experimental designs, both through observational data and prospective data. You've heard a little bit about conversations related to patient-reported outcomes and health economic analyses, but also learning how to develop clinical trial ideas. We spend a lot of our time developing AIMS pages, which is what you really need to do as you graduate from training into your own academic careers, to promote your ideas and sell your ideas to funding agencies so that you can become a grant-funded investigator over time. Not everybody will want to do that by the time they're done with the training program, but we think these skills that you'll leave with are going to be key for communicating ideas in science and programs and quality improvement activities and leadership activities in healthcare delivery systems and in research, both funded and unfunded. And it's a very rich and robust two years. We love the T32 training program at SORCE, and I think you'll hear more from the fellows that are in that program a little bit later. Grant, why don't you talk about your T32? Oh, I'm sorry, it looks like these are a little out of order, but we'll pop back to it. Grant, why don't you go ahead and talk about yours, and then we'll hit the global health one.
I think you're muted, Dr. O'Keefe.
Grant, we're not hearing you. Can I suggest we go back one slide? Barclay, why don't you take the the global health thing. And then Grant, we'll work on figuring out why we can't hear you, okay?
So I'm Barclay Stewart. I'm one of the trauma and burn faculty based at Harborview, but my interest and passion is in global surgery, and particularly equity and the way people access care and achieve good outcomes no matter where they are, either locally, regionally, or globally. So when we talk about global surgery here at the university, we really try to think about the concepts, problems, and approaches to deal with equity and access and distribution of workforce and such, not necessarily a location. To Shalene's point, we are happy to take people who are interested in global surgery, whether it's in the 5-year program or the 7-year track, and work with them to develop projects and ideas and their methodology around how to approach some of the questions that they want to answer, as Dr. Flum alluded to. We're kind of at a really exciting time in our department in relation to our program in global surgery. We have a long history of people doing research and really leading the field in global surgery with Ben Anderson and Charlie Mock. But more recently, we've been given the opportunity to develop this into a more formal program in several ways. We've learned lessons from around the country about universities that have taken one of two roads. One is an extremely unstructured road, which oftentimes doesn't provide enough foundation for people with not a lot of exposure in global health to get what they need to develop their research skills, get projects that they're interested in completed during training, and get academic positions when they finish. And the other end of the spectrum are those that are extremely formal and only track trainees into specific projects that doesn't give them the flexibility to engage with projects that they might otherwise be interested in. So we are trying to develop, are developing and have put together, in large part thanks to Kajal, who's spent a lot of time working on this, a framework of activities that allow people to express and develop their interests and learn methodology in global surgery, but also have network and structure and opportunities that are built for them, so they don't have to waste a lot of additional time during the training to achieve those. Certainly the hallmark of our program is the NIH Fogarty Global Health Research Fellowship. This is unique to only several universities around the country. We are the home base of one of the 5 NIH Fogarty Consortium, which allows us to develop projects that are of interest to Fogarty and have our trainees, 100% who have applied have matched into the program. The program is a 1 or 2-year experience that has several components. The first is time at the NIH to learn how the NIH works, specifically how global health works within and without the NIH. The next is 11-month in-country, and our sites are predominantly in Peru, Ghana, and Nepal, related to injury and burn care, though we've done projects related to access and barriers to care, equity, and health economics. So we can certainly accommodate anyone's interests. And that's for primary data collection, collaboration with mentors at one of those sites, and really learning how to do research in the field. And the third is a longitudinal program that really teaches the methodologies of research broadly and global health specifically, led by leaders from around the world in global health research. It's an incredible roster of people, to include folks even like Tony Fauci spends time with our trainees. And then lastly, we are, from many years ago, Dr. Charlie Mock spent time with the WHO and developed their trauma and acute care program. And since then, we've had one of our trainees, Andre Abawi, who now is a staff in the non-communicable disease and cancer program. Same with Dr. Benjamin Anderson, and Dr. Mock and I continue to be consultants for WHO injury projects. So we have lots of opportunities for folks who are interested in implementation science, WHO product development and testing, which is a really cool opportunity that allows us to influence the way care is done in a large part of the world. So in short, we have a very flexible program with a growing foundation of opportunities that makes it easy for you to capitalize on the network that's been built from the university and all the expertise within it to ensure that you have access to what you need to get global surgery research done in the time you have in training. See if Dr. O'Keefe can get his mic going.
Dr. O'Keefe, it looks like you are muted on your phone, is what I'm seeing.
Can you hear my phone now?
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for coming to join us this evening. I'm Grant O'Keefe. I'm a general surgeon and a trauma surgeon at Harborview. Like Dave Flum, I've been here for about 20 years. You're all probably surprised by the fact that we've both been here for 20 years because we're not old enough for that. Oh, there it is, my slide's up. I'm going to talk a little bit about translational research that has been ongoing at Harborview and UW Surgery for many years. And the picture that I show there is most of these folks are still here. This is the surgical division. A couple years older because Dr. Stewart isn't in the picture. And I show this picture because not everybody does research, but translational research really requires input from everybody in this picture. We get ideas from our colleagues. We work with them to sort of, to take ideas through to the end and get a lot of input and feedback, and this is sort of the first stage of sort of research collaboration, and that's a big part of what this T32 fellowship and other T32 fellowships are about. They're about giving you the opportunity to develop new ideas, to think about surgery and trauma and inflammation in ways that you haven't before, and really, come up with an idea that you can develop and learn new skills around that idea. And I think, as Dr. Flum and Dr. Stewart have mentioned, research has to be really flexible. My path to where I am now was, nobody could have marked that out in advance, and I think that that's really important, that we want to foster and develop people who have the skills and the ability to go in whatever direction that they ultimately want to go in, and that's a real focus of these T32 training programs is that they're meant to help you develop skills. They're meant to help you think about things in different ways, and they're meant to sort of be part of your path. As Dr. Flum mentioned, we really need to think about these in a very similar way to the way that we think about our clinical training. Is that it's part of a big journey. You come to learn how to be surgeons, and you leave with a lot of skills, but certainly you will develop more and more skills in future years, and research is the same way. When you come to spend 2 years in your research, we don't think of that as stepping out of the residency to spend 2 years of research and then going back to the residency. It's just a change in the focus, and I think that that's something really important to think about too, is that as you start along your research career and your research path, these 2 years will be incredibly important, but the subsequent years will build on these, on the skills that you develop in these years. Our focus has always been on, what is now called translational research, but that's really what surgeons have done for years. Thinking about, a surgical problem, figuring out how to at least get part of that answer in a laboratory setting, whether that's an animal laboratory or a cell biology laboratory, and then taking those observations back to the bedside. And we now have a name for it, but I think that's what surgeons have been doing for decades. Our focus is pretty broad. It's on inflammation, which really, when you think about it, is part of everything that we do. And we particularly are interested in the context of trauma and injuries, but certainly this can be, you know, this is vascular healing and vascular pathology. This is, you know, response to surgery. So it's a very broad area, and that's our goal, is to give you all the skills that will, you know, help you become investigators and surgeon scientists.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. O'Keefe. Good news is that Dr. Wright is able to join us after his case. So maybe we can have him introduce himself real quick.
Yeah, sorry. And I know Dr. Horvath was in the operating room as well. For those of you East Coasters, you got to get used to time zones. This is, it's only 6 o'clock here on the West Coast. Although I don't normally operate on Thursdays, I had to go help the plastic surgeons. So my name is Andrew Wright. I'm a general surgeon. I actually run our MIS fellowship. Most of my research interests are around both surgical education and then surgical outcomes. So I'm going to talk a little bit in a moment about the education piece of things. But before I do that, actually, Dr. O'Keefe, since you run sort of the resident research program, do you want to talk about this slide?
Well, Andy, I think we've gone through most of that.
Perfect.
Probably okay if you go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So then if you want to go ahead and advance a slide. As I mentioned, one of my main interests is in actually surgical education research. For those of you who haven't joined us on some of the earlier virtual visits, we're very proud of our simulation center, which is called WISH. WISH stands for the WWAMI Institute for Simulation in Healthcare. It was one of the first big surgical simulation centers. And one of the things I'm really proud about is that we actually use our simulation lab. I think a lot of places say they have simulation, they talk about their sim lab, and then the residents never actually go there or do anything. And there's not really active research and scholarship in simulation. So we have an active education research work group. Dr. Langdale over at the VA heads that work group. And we actually have in addition to the simulation center, we have a big simulation science program run by Dr. Hananel and one of our urologists, Rob Sweet. And they actually have funding for an education research fellow, which is a 2-year fellowship. So in addition to the global health track and in addition to the T32s that Dr. Flum runs and Dr. O'Keefe runs, that's another avenue. And we've had residents do that. This may have been mentioned before, but a lot of our residents get other degrees during their research time. So that can be an MPH. We've had a few years ago, one of our residents got a master's in education. So I think it's one of the things that I'm proud of about our department is we really support our residents, not just in traditional basic science, no offense to Dr. O'Keefe, but we have basic science, we have outcomes, we have education, we really have we have global health, we really have the whole gamut of opportunities, and all of them are valued within the department. So I'll speak for Dr. Horvath since she couldn't be here. As I'm sure you all know, we have both a 7-year track or a 5-year track. And it's okay to apply to either one. It's also okay to apply to both. But just know that if you apply to the 7-year track, and you match in that track, that's the direction you're going. But we do have actively folks matching in both tracks.
Excellent. I think that's perfect timing. So it gives us about 20 minutes or so for Q&A. I know that there's been some ongoing discussion in the chat, which has been great. I'll just start out with a couple of questions that we've gotten previously. I think a good question, and I'll open it up to the residents to answer, is how does the program support students and applicants in the process of finding research mentors.
Grant,
might have to call on somebody.
Yeah, Grant, why don't you take that one? I can start while Grant's figuring out his audio. There's a small group of residents who are interested in moving out to research each year. Dr. Horvath anticipates that by 2 years and starts conversations with the residents about their interests. And it's a very collaborative process where it's a set of interviews and informal coffees and try to feel out what people are interested in and where there's a match of interest. It's a lot of talking among the residents. So it would be interesting to hear how, let's say, Alex and David, two second-year fellows, how they found their way through, because I think how we imagine it works is probably in reality different at the resident level. So why don't we let a resident take that?
David, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. My path is a little bit interesting. I actually matched to the 5-year program first, and then a vacancy opened up in the 7-year track. I have always had an interest in surgical outcomes, and so had early conversations with Dr. Flum and Dr. Davidson, who are the main mentors in the Surgical Outcomes Research Center. So for me, those mostly happened organically because, again, I wasn't identified as a research resident from the get-go.
Alex, what about you?
Yeah, so I had applied to the 7-year track, was interested in outcomes research coming into residency. So I had, I think SORCE was one of the reasons that I thought so highly of the University of Washington to begin with. And then after discussions with Dr. Horvath and Dr. Flum, really reaffirmed for me that that was the direction I wanted to go, to do the T32, have the opportunity to do a Master's of Science degree in clinical epidemiology, and then really focusing on gaining those additional research skills that would help me start my future research practice in academics.
And then I do also want to point out that we occasionally find that if we don't have the right fit here at the UW, we actually support residents who go elsewhere. So Vishal Patel, for example, went down to UCSF and did one of their entrepreneurship and engineering programs. Chris, why don't you talk about what you're doing? Or maybe you already did before I joined.
Yeah, I kind of mentioned it a little bit, but I can elaborate a little on how I got here. I decided, early on in my 2nd year that I would be specializing in transplant, and so there are an abundance of clinical research opportunities within the division of transplant at UW, and so there is a robust research engine there. But I'm interested in translational and basic science, and as I had mentioned earlier, there's not really an option for that within transplant at UW at this time, and so I began to look elsewhere, and had quite a bit of support from Dr. Horvath and from Dr. Flum and O'Keefe through the process. It's not, how I would have, nobody wants to leave their residency. I don't think that's the intent at all, but it's nice knowing that, if there are opportunities elsewhere, and there isn't something to fill that requirement at UW, that the department will be supportive of us. And they do a good job of kind of keeping me involved, and it's a little different with COVID, but I would have come back for the different research conferences. I'm going to come back for AppSite and different things like that. So it's a little bit non-traditional, but I still feel very supported and still very connected with the residency.
Awesome. Thank you, Chris. I thought we would move over to some of the questions in the chat group. There's been quite a bit of discussion. some of which have been answered, but I think should be highlighted. Michelle Oberoi asked, would there be 2 different interviews for the 7 and 5-year tracks? And I just wanted to answer, which I think Dr. Droullard did, that no, it's the same interview. You would just designate and express your interest in either or both of the tracks.
Hey, Kajal, I'll take the question about the subsequent K awards and R awards of our trainees. So one of the ways that the T32s are renewed, and they're every 5 years that they're up for renewal, is you have to demonstrate that the prior trainees who are now moving through the process of academia, that a sufficient number of them have applied for and achieved independent funding. That's like the coin of the realm for getting your T32 renewed. So we do keep very careful records on every application, and although it does of course take probably 7 years after your T32 to be in a position to start applying for grants, we are seeing lots and lots of successful academic achievements and independent funding on our prior trainees. So we're very excited about that. Grant, why don't you comment about that from your side of the T32?
I think that's this is a really important part of the conversation about research training. As Dr. Flum mentioned, sort of from the NIH standpoint, they want to see that folks are moving on to become independent researchers, and historically that's been the NIH, the NIH R01. And the good news is that that's changing. There are a lot more opportunities for having your research career supported, whether it's through the Department of Defense. There's lots of opportunities, and our goal is really to sort of do some of the things that help get you there, in addition to the T32s and the 2 research years. For example, as you move on to your clinical years, what we hope is that during those last few years we can keep the sort of the momentum in terms of moving towards a K award, for example, and so that you're not starting again once you're done the final few years of your surgery residency and your clinical fellowship. And I think that's a concept that I think is really important. And we look at like as Dr. Flum mentioned, that there are sort of objective measures of success, and we all have a number of our T32 fellows who have had K awards and have subsequently gone on to get funding, either through the NIH or the Department of Defense and others.
Excellent. And then another question that there's been a little bit of conversation about from Brian is, do residents commonly conduct translational research? I think Droullard had a nice answer to that, if you want to elaborate.
Oh, yeah, sure. No, it varies significantly year by year. I mean, 4 residents per year is a fairly small sample size, so you can expect a lot of differences there. So the current new crop of research residents is only 1 out of 4, but the year ahead of me was 3 out of 4. And as Dr. O'Keefe mentioned, the most common sites for bench research are at Harborview with his T32 and with our Surg Onc faculty. But again, people, depending on their interests, some do some bench research that's in collaboration with Seattle Children's Hospital residents have done, and then other sites as well.
Yeah, I was actually going to mention, just by chance, and I feel kind of bad, the 4 faculty on the line are all men, but actually we have some great women research scientists as well. And Kim Reilly is one of our pediatric surgeons who has an active basic science lab over at Seattle Children's. So she's a fantastic person to work with too. And Shireen Shaloub does a lot of vascular research, and some of our residents have worked with her. Gianna Davidson does a lot of our outcomes research and runs the CODA trial, which the CODA trial is being released next week, right?
Yeah, on Monday. We're very excited about that.
That's very exciting. I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. There's I think a good question we haven't touched on from Monty about what are the call schedule and clinical responsibilities during the research period, if any. Jamie, I know you gave an answer in the chat box, but if you want to just tell everybody.
Sure, yeah. So by the NIH T32 contracts, we are limited to a maximum of 200 hours of clinical coverage. The UW adopts that for all of the research residents, regardless of grant status. And so for the UW, we are not allowed to work more than 200 hours. On average, it seems like based off the last 2 years, it's around 120 hours, and this is per year. And every resident has the choice to moonlight, and that's just based on personal preference and would add clinical hours based on your choice there.
Excellent. And then let's see, there's a question for Dr. Zhang, which the question was essentially hearing a little bit more about policy and advocacy research. And if you're working with surgeons or interdisciplinary teams, if you want to elaborate a little bit more on that. Irene.
Yeah, happy to. I typed out a little bit of the background in the chat as well. But basically, I think one of the great things about UW and SORCE has been kind of the multidisciplinary background of faculty and collaborators who are interested and excited to work with us. So in some ways, I think also as there's support for getting a degree at the main UW University, there's also an opportunity to kind of network and connect with some of those other collaborators. But so far in my projects, it's been kind of the surgical mentors through SORCE and through the department, but also other faculty who are affiliated with SORCE from the public health school who have their own backgrounds in health services research, in public policy and health economics. So it's really been great and multidisciplinary and exciting to connect with all of those people.
For those of you interested in that, the former chair of the Department of Health Services in the School of Public Health is a key SORCE faculty member, a great mentor named Larry Kessler. And, you know, it does speak to the breadth and multidisciplinary nature of all of the training programs and research. I have to say, one of the biggest surprises coming to UW was its main adjective, the way I would describe the place is it's just connected, it's bridged. There's great bridges between the different groups. There's not a lot of silos here and a ton of interdisciplinary work, even between the T32 programs. So Dr. O'Keefe and I are collaborating on an upcoming grant. And, you know, in the past, Ben Anderson and Global Health has worked with others in other training programs. There's a lot of bridges here. And I think you'll find that as you come here as well.
Excellent. Another question from Ben. Is there an expected number of research articles that residents are expected to publish, and how is the authorship process handled? Kat, we haven't heard from you. Do you want to give your thoughts on this?
Sure. I think that Dr. Stewart already had a great explanation in the chat as well. But to echo what he said, you know, the training program really focuses on making you into a good researcher, and what makes you a good researcher goes beyond just getting publications. I would say that the skills that you will learn in this track are inevitably going to enable you to get those good publications. Of course, the authorship is very dependent on a project by project basis. We do a biomedical research integrity training program, and one of the things we discuss in that program is that there should be a discussion of authorship almost prior to the initiation of a project or prior to the initiation of a manuscript. And so an authorship agreement should ideally be hashed out. This will depend on your specific PI in your group, but that is the culture that we have here, is that it is a discussion and dependent on basically how much work that you contributed to that manuscript.
Again, one of the outcome measures that the T32s get tracked on is the academic products, we call them, presentations, abstracts, publications. And just because you asked a question about the number, I'll just tell you that we totally endorse that notion that there's no number that's right for everybody. But one of the ways that we gauge progress is the number of projects that are actually started to completed. So finishing the arc, completing that arc that's one of the most salient skills in research, frankly. It's super hard to get something published, actually, and landing that is really a skill set. Most people who finish the T32 programs have between 5 and 7 publications, abstracts, presentations as part of their portfolio and skill set. And I echo the conversation about authorship. The success of the T32 is that the trainees are the first authors, and they are advocating from day one as they initiate the project to have conversations about authorship, because that's what being a researcher is for your career. So we want them to be trained in that process of how to talk about authorship, and it's like a skill set, like learning how to put a stitch in.
Thanks, Dr. Flum. And Dr. Stewart, if you want to elaborate a little bit more on the conversation about mixed methods going on, just so everybody can hear.
Yeah, the question was just specifically about a specific type of methodology, and I think the answer is a bit related to, again, finding the right mentors. And the mentors not only are those who have content expertise, but who have methodologic expertise. And we all work in collaborative groups to ensure that both our ideas, our approaches, our methodologies, and the collaborators around how those get disseminated all match to form, as Dr. Flum said, a good scientific product in the end. So SORCE, the Harvard University Prevention and Research Center, and certainly our other departments in the university, there's very little rocks unturned, as they say, with regard to what approaches we can help find mentors for you in your interest. So we definitely support anyone who has any interest in a specific methodology.
Excellent. Any other questions that have come up that I've missed? I think Dr. Wright's, if you want to elaborate a little bit on the education projects that are ongoing and your social media work, that'd be great.
Sure. So the biggest funded project going on right now in education is actually out of Rob Sweet's lab. They have a big grant to develop a modular smart mannequin. So if you've seen something like Trauma Man that's used in trauma training, it's literally just a dumb mannequin. But the idea is to embed sensors into every aspect of the mannequin so you can actually measure what the person is doing. So that's, and it's the idea of modular is you can drop in pieces into the mannequin based on what you're trying to teach. So if you're doing a trauma lab, that may look very different than a bleeding during laparoscopy lab, but you can repurpose modular pieces. So it's a really interesting grant. It's well funded, and that's actually what is supporting the simulation fellow right now. Currently, it's actually a urology resident filling that role, but that role is open to general surgery residents as well. I have done a lot of work on basic skill acquisition. So Aaron Jensen, a number of years ago, was a resident in the lab with me. And we did a big project on how residents acquire basic surgical skills. I think he wrote like 16 publications in 2 years. He was remarkably productive. Right now, I'm actually looking, the last paper I published was actually on YouTube and the quality of surgical videos, because it turns out that the #1 resource that residents are now using to learn how to do an operation is to go on YouTube and watch videos. And it turns out the overall quality of those videos is actually pretty poor. So we're trying to advocate for a better quality. And I think our next step is to look at how we can do media literacy training for our residents so that they can realize what's good and what's bad videos, and where they should be learning from. I did post up there also about advocacy. I just want to point out advocacy, I think, is something that we are very strong in here at UW, and it goes into a lot of what different people do. So I'm sure Dr. Stewart could talk about advocacy in global health. Dr. Williams is going to be doing our diversity, equity, and inclusion seminar in a couple of weeks, and she is very, very strong in advocacy, and in fact, organized a healthcare workers march here in Seattle recently. We also have work around gender issues. So Mo recently published a paper on the impact of gender biased reinforcement and what that does to skill performance in a simulated task. So there's a lot of work, and you can tie almost any sort of work that you do, even if it's basic science work, you can tie into advocacy. There's a lot of folks over at Harborview that do a lot of advocacy around trauma and injury prevention. So I think it's sort of baked into a lot of what people do here. I don't know, Dr. Stewart or Dr. O'Keefe, you want to, I mean, because I know there's a lot done at Harborview in that regard.
Yeah,
Barclay?
Sure. There are certainly folks here who have lots of experience and very strong and passionate and purposeful voices in advocacy for care of the injured, and particularly equity and how that's performed both within our region and our state, but certainly nationally and internationally. Dr. Ellen Bolger, Sam Mendel, Sam Bobby, and Dr. Mayer have spent their entire careers figuring out how we can advocate for better resources and organizations for injury care. So that takes the form of not only specific advocacy efforts, but how that's done in comparing different policies and that the effects of those policies have on the way trauma systems are developed and funded, and how people get insurance for trauma and that sort of thing. On another kind of related note, Dr. Mehta is working on a project related to how trauma education gets incentivized from government levels around the world. So as Dr. Wright said, the advocacy and policy work certainly takes the slant of the research is doing, and we can certainly connect you to those folks.
And I think I'd just like to add that certainly one of the things that I've learned over my time here is that we as a faculty really think of research as it's very broad, and I think that hopefully what you're seeing is that our ability to facilitate wherever your interests lie, I think that we have the ability to do that. Just have a very broad faculty who are interested in research in the biggest sense of the word, and however that whatever that looks like. And I think that there's not a lot of departments and opportunities for surgical residents to have that breadth of experience. And I think the other another perhaps important part of this is that you may choose to do global health research, but at the same time, you'll be exposed to your colleagues who are doing health outcomes research and translational research. And I think it just makes for an incredibly rich learning environment. And it's wonderful in that regard.
I think we have just a couple of minutes left to be respectful of everybody's time. Dr. Wright, do you want to briefly touch on the upcoming events and ways to contact folks?
Yeah, sure. So we have 2 more virtual visits scheduled. Next week at 5:30, we're covering actually 2 topics. One is we have a department-wide wellness initiative, and we're going to be talking about that. And then we're also going to be talking about our Women's Council. And then the week following that, on the 15th, again at 5:30 on Thursday, we're going to be talking about our diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts from the department, which is really, obviously the year of 2020 has highlighted this, but is something that I think we've been trying to be mindful of for quite some time. So certainly invite all of you to come to those sessions. These are also being recorded. So if you missed some of the earlier sessions, those are actually up on the department YouTube page. So feel free to watch those. And I think almost all the faculty that I can think of are pretty open. So if you have questions, reach out to the faculty or reach out to the current residents. I'm actually probably answer faster on Twitter than I do by email, but I think all of us are pretty open to that.
And this is Dr. Horvath. Sorry, I just finished up. I was called away by perforated viscus, and I'm so sorry I missed our time today together. But if anyone has any questions for me that kind of specifically need me to answer, then I am here now.
Yeah, I think Kajal did a fantastic job taking over as moderator, since both you and I were called to the OR. I stepped in about halfway through, and she was doing great. So
Thanks, Kajal, for your great leadership on that one.
No, absolutely. Thank you. Anybody else have any last burning questions before we let everyone go on with their evenings? Eat some dinner. Oh, actually, one last thing to mention. If you want to get in touch with any of us, you can go to just Google UW Surgery, General Surgery, and there are profiles available for, I believe, the faculty as well as all of the residents. And so you can learn a little bit more about our interest and find our email addresses to continue the conversation.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Thank you.